Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Laura.
I'm Kate.
And this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking.
It's that time of year again when we start considering the books we're going to be squeezing into our suitcases because, excitingly, this year, now that international travel has opened up again, we might actually be going somewhere.
In fact, I've already travelled recently when I had the great pleasure of flying into London last month simply to hang out and talk books with Kate in person.
Of course, I lost no time in taking her to Book Bar, one of my very favourite bookshops. And so listen in as we talk you through the books that caught our eye there, and we hear from owner Chrissy Ryan, who runs us through a few of her tips for books not to miss this summer. That's not all, we've got even more recommendations from a few friends of the pod. So if you're curious what show regular Phil Chafee is diving into this summer, what Emily Rhodes of Emily's Walking Book Club is planning on reading, what Nadia O'Doneo of Book Recommendations app The Storygraph thinks you should try, what one-time journalist, now bookseller Tom Rowley is planning on reading when he gets a second off setting up his new bookshop, and finally, what one of my favourite authors, Ed Caesar, thinks might be the perfect page-turner for you, keep listening. And so, whether you're seeking out a nice drink and a sun lounger in the Northern Hemisphere, or cozying up with a blanket in the Southern, we've got a show packed with great reads we think you're going to love.
All that coming up here on the Book Club Review.
Here we are at Book Bar, our favourite bookshop in North London, with owner Chrissy Ryan. The rain is pouring down outside, so of course, naturally, our thoughts turn to summer reading. So we've had a little look around the shelves and pulled down a couple of books. I've got two that I've read, one that I want to read. Laura's got a little stack there, Chrissy's sitting here. So what are our picks for a bit of beach reading this summer? Chrissy, do you want to go first?
It's so interesting with summer reading because you often just want something that you can sink into. That is my definition of summer reading, I think. Just something that you can't put down, but that also doesn't necessarily make you want to throw it away straight afterwards. You want to just be completely absorbed over the summer. And so my pick is a book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, an American writer that I used to read when she wrote YA books when I was a teenager, and loved her writing. So I was delighted to discover recently that she had written an adult novel. I don't want you to hear the premise and think that's not for me, because I promise it is. It's about two people who meet in hospital as children, sort of young teenagers. One of them is visiting their very unwell sister, and the other has had this very traumatic car accident that has left him completely changed. They, by chance, meet in this hospital children's play area, and they start playing video games. And this is in the 70s, 80s, back at the dawn of video games. And they become really firm friends. Many, many years later, they've fallen out of touch with one another. And they bump into each other when they're both in the same university town. And they decide to make a video game together. And this video game becomes a real success. And they end up becoming this incredibly successful gaming partner team. I'm a bookseller. I did game a bit when I was a kid. I had two brothers who were very into gaming. So there's a bit of nostalgia there for me, but nowhere near what I thought I would need to enjoy this book. Because actually what it's about is about friendship and different types of love. There is romantic love in there, but it's not between them. It's about their friendship, and it's about them building this business, and it's about being creative in a way that you don't actually often hear about in books or in films. Being creative is about writing or acting or painting or that sort of thing. But actually the act of creating a game and the collaboration that takes, it's such a brilliant book. I honestly couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop thinking about the characters. All I wanted to do when I was in the shop for the couple of days I was reading it was just go home and read. And it's been a really long time since I've had that feeling. It's the pick I have for a summer read that will just sweep you away entirely.
I love the sound of that. And actually, I think it's the gaming hook where I actually got really interested because it feels, I hate the word fresh. You use that in advertising a lot, but it feels fresh. I don't know. I haven't read anything about that world ever. So that sounds really great to me. Interesting that you chose a book by an author who you read when you were younger, because the books that I've picked out are both by authors who I've already read. And I think there's something about summer reading where you want a sure thing, right? And so going back to an author who you loved previously, you're like, I hope I know what I'm going to get. And so the first one I picked out from the shelves of your beautiful bookshop is The Field by Robert Seathaler. He's the author of A Whole Life and The Tobacconist. I've read both those books, talked about both on the podcast. He writes these slim, beautiful novels, similar treatment on the covers. That's why I recognized it. And this sounds quite... Actually, you know what this sounds like? This sounds a little bit like Lincoln in the Bardo, done in German. The first paragraph says, "The field is the oldest part of the cemetery in the small town of Polstadt, where some of its most outspoken residents can be found. Instead of resting silently in their graves, these last inhabitants tell stories from their lives." This isn't your typical beach read by any means, but ideally when I go on holiday, I want to get through at least 3 books. And so you want to have books of different lengths and you want to have books in slightly different styles. And this one is only maybe like, what? Well, it's 200 pages, but some nice typesetting. And I could see this ticking my literary box before I would turn to The Sea of Tranquility, which is Emily St. John Mandel's latest novel. Chrissy, have you read this yet?
Yes, and I really enjoyed it. I haven't read the previous book.
Oh, The Glass Hotel.
I haven't read The Glass Hotel. And what I didn't realise is that she's done a bit of a David Mitchell thing of it being interconnected but completely separate stories. So you definitely don't have to have read the previous book. And thank goodness, because I hadn't. But I also think if you have read the previous book, you'll be rewarded. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed it.
I read The Glass Hotel with my book club, and it's by no means a perfect book, but she has quite a distinctive clarity to her prose, and her storytelling always has something that feels typical of her, like that someone else couldn't do. And for me, there's always a connection to, well, Canada, because she is Canadian. And with The Glass Hotel and with this one, events begin in British Columbia in the rainforest I know so well. So this would be my next pick. Kate, what are you going to put in your summer reading list?
It's interesting, isn't it, what makes a good summer reading list? And I think it's important to have options because you just don't know until you get to the place that you're going what you're going to be in the mood for. So it's very important to have a variety, I think. And so I've got 3, 2 I've read and 1 that I want to read. I've got Deborah Levy's Hot Milk. A lot of people, I think, have come to Deborah Levy through the autofiction trilogy that are incredibly accessible and really made my heart leap with joy when I read them. They were so great. But I actually have a slightly more problematic relationship with her fiction. But Hot Milk, I just loved. It's about a very, very intense mother-daughter relationship. The mother is an extreme hypochondriac, and in that hypochondria is an element of control, and the daughter is railing against that. She has taken the mother to this place in Spain where the mother thinks that she's going to be able to get some kind of treatment for some condition. She's found a doctor, perhaps a charlatan in himself, and so the daughter is really questioning what's going on, and she's stuck in this, and it's not a lovely resort. It's very hot and not really very nice place to be. She tries to swim in the sea and it's full of jellyfish. It's that sort of thing. Everything is barbed, but in a way that I really loved. And there is this slight mystery at the heart of this relationship between the two that absolutely kept me powering through it. I love it. And then for contrast, I've got Early Morning Riser by Katherine Heine, recommended to me by Chrissy on a previous trip to Book Bar. She is an author I absolutely love. She writes these warm, funny, delightful books about relationships, about families, about the dynamics between people, about parents, about children, about life when it doesn't go quite the way you expect. I feel like nobody does a family dinner set piece like Katherine Heine. She's absolutely brilliant at that. It's laugh out loud funny, and it's about a relationship that you think shouldn't work, that no one thinks is going to work. But actually, this couple do make it work. And it's just really immersive. And then one that I want to read, another one recommended by Chrissy that I haven't got to yet, is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. It's just out. I think this is going to be on everyone's summer reading list this year, isn't it? Chrissy, perhaps you could tell it better than I am. What's it about?
It's about a woman in the 1950s who is a scientist, and she's the only woman working as a scientist in the lab, and it's assumed that she's a secretary or something like that, or a lab assistant. And It's about the prejudices that she experiences at work. And then when she becomes pregnant and ends up being a single mother, the prejudices she experiences there, but also how she ends up becoming a TV chef and teaching women chemistry through this TV program.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It's really fun, and she's got a really distinct voice. There's a little bit of that sharpness of Curtis Sittenfeld there, but it's slightly twee, and that's not a criticism. It's just got that warmth that will help you to power through it and just really enjoy it as a summer read.
So they're my summer picks. And the other thing I'd recommend for anyone planning their summer reading is, you can delete Instagram from your phone. It takes all of 2 seconds. And then just reinstall it when you come back. You don't lose anything. And I have tested this out. And honestly, people say, I want to fit more reading into my life. I promise you, if you just switch off that one app or whatever it is that you're looking at, Twitter or TikTok or whatever, you will find you just get a lot more reading done. It's just worth a try. I think people really underestimate how easy it is just to delete that little app and then reinstall it when you want it.
Chrissy, where are you going on holiday? Where are you going to read these books?
Oh, it's such a good question. I actually do have a holiday booked. I'm going to Dubrovnik, and I can't wait. It'll be the first time I've been abroad since the pandemic, but also the first time I've spent a week away, not only from this very street since I opened Book Bar, but from Book Bar itself.
Exciting. You're leaving your baby
for
an
an amazing
week.
Team now. So yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah. I'm very scared, but also it'll be really, really nice.
Well, I'm so grateful that you made the time to sit down and chat with me on my flying London visit. So happy to meet you in 3 dimensions.
And then we're going to swap you out for your colleague Lucy, who I think also has a good recommendation for us. Hi, Lucy. Hi. So nice to have you on the pod.
It's so nice to be on the pod. Thank you for having me.
I've had a brief chat with you at the till about summer reading, so I know you've got a good tip for us. What's your summer pick?
My top summer pick for anyone going on holiday is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. It is the most romantic, gorgeous novel. It opens in a hot New York. The main character is an artist, and she begins to have some dating experiences with some very, very gorgeous people. It's romantic, it's sexy, there's a lot of amazing food. She goes to an island. It's, for me, the ultimate holiday, sexy, fun book.
I love this. A steamy encounter at a rooftop party cascades into a whirlwind summer she could never have imagined. A luxury trip to a tropical island, decadent meals, and the glamorous home of a celebrity chef. But this new life just got a lot more complicated. The one man she wants is the one man she most definitely cannot have.
It sounds so perfect.
Lucy, you've hooked me. I'm in.
She's nailed it. Do you know about spreads?
Spreads? I do not, no.
I'm not sure if this is actually a legitimate publishing term or whether it's just a slang word. It is used, I believe. It's sprayed edges, books with sprayed edges, spreads.
Yes, yes.
You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty has the most beautiful sprayed edges of any book I have ever seen. It is absolutely exquisite. It's the independent bookstore edition that has the spreads. It's worth going to an independent bookstore just to get a hold of a copy because it is absolutely gorgeous.
The copy of Sea of Tranquility, Emily St. John Mandel's latest novel, which I picked up at Book Bar, it has beautiful spreads in limited edition quantities. So I do know what you're talking about. I think it's a real thing. I remember when Canongate was doing it like 5-10 years ago, but I feel like everyone's finally cottoned on.
Yes, well, it's all part of this thing, isn't it? Trying to lure people back to print books. And it suddenly dawned on publishers that if they wanted people to buy print books, they had to really make them something special, something that people actively wanted to have the physical copy. And so I love, like from a designer's point of view, I love the way that it's all become about the look and the feel of the thing and the beautiful paper and the spreads.
You're making me want to go to a bookshop and buy lots of books.
Well, all that takes me back nicely to a very fun few days while you were here. Since then, you've had a nice long plane journey back. Maybe you've had time to read a few more things. Anything that would qualify for summer reading?
Yes. The first I want to talk about is The Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin, which sprung up on our Instagram feed. Someone had an advance copy back in, I don't know, April, May, and it was like, I want to read that. What's that? And they're like, oh, well, it's an advance copy. I really think publishers are missing a slight trick with advance copies because if it's promoted before you can buy the book, then you forget that you want to buy the book And so you have to rely on serendipity to bring the book back onto the reader's radar, which, okay, did indeed happen with me. It was just last weekend that A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting sprang up on my radar again, and I read it in 48 hours. I must say, 48 hours is how long it takes me to read any Georgette Heyer novel, which is truly the inspiration for Sophie Irwin's book. In fact, I was completely sold on this title because of the author's bio, where she flags that she has written a dissertation in the past about how Georgette Heyer helped win World War II. That's all she says. I don't know what she means, but I'm desperate to find out more. This is an author who clearly knows her Georgette Heyer novels, and this is cut very much from the same cloth, without the more problematic elements of Heyer that can crop up. Here's the blurb, just to sum it all up. A whip-smart debut that follows the adventures of an entirely unconventional heroine who throws herself into the London season to find a wealthy husband. But the last thing she expects to find, ... is love. It's incredibly formulaic in the best possible way.
Is it good?
Everything's
though?
in there, Kate.
Because there are so many.
It is good.
You know, there's been
Yes,
many an imitator, and your heart just sort of breaks a little bit each time because they're not.
I have dabbled with the imitators. I won't name names. They're on my Kindle. They have died on my Kindle because what you need in a novel like this, I mean, the reason we like novels like this isn't just for the romance, but it's for the heroine who's smart and feisty. Is for the stock pieces. There has to be an elopement. You have to have someone heading to Gretna Green. You have to have the London season. And, what's it called? The very prestigious...
Olmax.
Olmax has to be there. You have to have discussion of Hessian boots. There are tropes, and all the tropes are here. It does make me wonder if you hadn't read Georgette Heyer, how much you would enjoy this book. But, to each their own. If you're a fan of Jane Austen, Georgette Heyer, the publisher says Bridgerton, though I think it's very different. This is for you. I first read Georgette Heyer on summer holiday, so she is synonymous with summer escapism for me.
Well, I'm incredibly intrigued. I'm a little bit wary, but I trust you. I feel like if you endorse this, that means something to me, so I'd be prepared to give that a go. Would you like to hear from one of our friends of the pod? Here's Emily from Emily's Walking Book Club. Here is a book that she loves for the summer months.
My perfect summer read is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. It's a bit of a classic. It takes place in a remembered summer of 1920. The narrator, Tom, remembers this summer, a boiling hot, beautiful August, when he goes up to a fictional Yorkshire village to restore a painting in a church. And while he's there, he forms various relationships with other people in the village. It's a really beautiful book and feels like a very special one. I think it's the perfect summer read because it has in it a feeling of disconnection, really, from day-to-day life. Tom has gone to this village for a specific project. He's there for this idyllic, strangely hot summer. And when he leaves, he won't be returning. It's just this one instance in his life that was so formative for him and which he remembers. Memory is a big thing in the book. Both Tom and another key character, Moon, have come through the First World War, and there's this terrible undercurrent of violence and the awful things that have happened running underneath the surface of this village pastoral. So a really powerful book.
I also asked her what she was planning on packing in her own suitcase this year.
Now I've talked about A Month in the Country, I'm kind of tempted to reread it for the 5th time. It is a really wonderful book to return to summer after summer. But as well as that, I think I will read Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Trapido, which people have been telling me to read for years and years and years. And somehow I've never got round to it. And then this beautiful new edition was published earlier this year by Bloomsbury. It comes garnished with a foreword by Maria Semple and afterword by Rachel Cusk. There's no excuse now not to read it. I have it in my hand and I'm sure I will enjoy it. So I'm really looking forward to having some time to settle into that.
I love the sound of Brother of the More Famous Jack.
Anne Patchett says it's the best possible company in this difficult world, while Rachel Cusk says there are few modern tales of first love and its disillusions that are as thoroughly realised, as brilliantly lewd, and as hilariously satisfying to men and women of all ages as this one. Meg Rossoff said, think Brideshead Revisited set in the 1970s, only sexier and much funnier. It kills me that I didn't read it at university when I really needed it. I pitched this to my parent friend's book club recently, hopefully, but they didn't go for it. It's a great frustration to me that it's a book club that's not mine, so I have very low influence levels. Like I'm very low in the pecking order of that book club, whereas my own book club, I can kind of, push them a little bit, although they would say
we both do that, don't we?
But no, with this one, I pitch things to them and then they're like, yes, and then they choose something completely different. And while we're at it, shall we have another quick recommendation? This one is from Nadia Odeneo, who runs the Storygraph. I always get really excited by the idea of logging my reading, but in practice, turns out that I do that best by talking about it, hence this podcast. But if I was someone who wanted to do it digitally, the Storygraph is my dream app. I love the interface. I love the graphics it generates of your reading stats. If you're someone who likes to review and keep notes as you go along, who wants to connect up with others, and also, crucially, because I think this is something the Storygraph is really good at, find other great recommendations for books that you might like, then this is the app for you. Anyway, here's Nadia with her summer reading recommendation, and I have a feeling, Laura, that you're going to endorse this one.
My recommendation for a great summer read is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, the first book in her Live Ship Traders trilogy. This book is a fantasy epic featuring pirates, talking ships, magic materials, sea serpents, revolts, battles, family drama, love, and more. I was completely immersed in this amazing fantasy world that Robin Hobb has built. And I love the variety of characters and storylines and all of the different aspects that were covered and touched on. Now, this book is almost 900 pages, which might be intimidating, but Robin Hobb has such an accessible, captivating way of writing that you can't help but get lost in the pages, and it's essentially a page turner. It's adventurous, emotional, mysterious, and there's a mix of plot and character-driven elements. And you grow to fall in love with the range of characters and almost believe they are real. Now, if you do pick this up this summer and you love it, I recommend you pausing and going to pick up Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy first, which is the first trilogy she wrote as part of this large universe that she's constructed. And then you can get back to the Live Ship Traders trilogy. So I hope that you choose to pick up and absolutely love Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb this summer.
And I seem to remember that you're a Robin Hobb fan.
Oh my goodness. I have never spoken to Nadia. We have talked about bringing her on the show, though, and this just clinches the deal for me. I have read every single Robin Hobb book that has been published, including the book she writes under a different name. I think it's Megan Lindholm. I started reading them in my teens, and so there are just authors who you will forgive anything because you're on a journey with them. You've grown up with them. Great recommendation. A bit left field, too.
Okay, sounds like you had another summer read up your sleeve. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, I haven't actually finished this book. In fact, in some ways, I think I'm just beginning it, though I feel like I'm quite far in. It's called The Whalebone Theatre by Joanna Quinn. Have you heard of this one?
I think I have. Yeah, I feel like maybe I've heard good things.
Well, Amazon are doing their best to make it the book of the summer, and I get it. I actually really get it. I don't think the cover does it justice. It looks a little bit commercial. I mean, maybe it's that perfect crossover of commercial appeal and literary chops. I was hooked simply by the quotes that support it. Frances Bufford, author of Light Perpetual and On Golden Hill, which we discussed on the pod, says of it, "The circus playfulness of the language, the old story of the great house dazzlingly refreshed, the kind heart and the witty eye, the deep understanding of a girl's need to be the hero of her own life. This is a book that will be loved unreasonably and lifelong, I believe, like I Capture the Castle." So far in my reading, I've only journeyed with this young girl as far as I think maybe her 6th birthday. And she's living in this old stately house shortly after the First World War when taxes are going up and assets are being sold off. And it's reminding me very much of the Cazalet Chronicles
by Elizabeth Jane Howard,
which my book club adore. I was slightly less convinced. But it has everything you want, very atmospheric, of its time, beautiful details, beautiful language. And then I was slightly surprised when I started reading the blurb that supports it ahead of our discussion, because the blurb tells me much more about what's to come. And there it says, a transporting, irresistible debut novel that takes its heroine, Christabel Seagrave, from the gargantuan cavity of a beached whale. Well, what? That hasn't come up yet. Into undercover operations during World War II. A story of love, bravery, lost innocence, and self-transformation. I still haven't got to a book I'm supposed to be reading for you, Tomb of Sand, winner of the Man Booker International Prize, because I started reading this and I just want to read it, Kate. I'm ready for my summer reading now.
And it's coming back to me now why I've heard of it, because Kate Sawyer, who wrote The Stranding, which is a book about a woman who survives a nuclear apocalypse by hiding in the belly of a beached whale, had read this, I think, in that way that authors read things often in advance. That's how you get all those cover quotes. And she had said that it was brilliant. So, yeah, that's why I was like, oh, yeah, I've heard good things. Well, if anyone would know about books in which people hide in beached whales, it would be Kate Sawyer.
I do have one more recommendation, although perhaps it's not fair to say it's a recommendation because I only heard of it today. But I am very intrigued by James Robertson's News of the Dead, which just won the 2022 Walter Scott Prize, which is my personal favorite prize because it focuses on historical fiction. And I've already pinged it over to Phil, who we'll be hearing from shortly, because it seemed like a book right up his alley. Deep in the mountains of northeast Scotland lies Glen Connacht, a place of secrets and memories, fable and history. In particular, it holds the stories of 3 different eras, separated by centuries yet linked by location, by an ancient manuscript, and by echoes that travel across time. And Phil has just been to the Scottish Highlands, so he was like, I wish I had that while I was up there. But I think it can take him back, and certainly listeners, if you're headed there, or even to the Med, this might be the book for you. Okay, I am out of recommendations now. What do you have?
I have a couple more. I made a new friend the other day. I will let him explain who he is.
I'm Tom Rowley, and until 3 months ago I was a journalist at The Economist, and then in a moment of extreme madness I handed in my reasonably well-paid, secure job to become a bookseller. So I have just set up London's newest independent bookshop called Backstory, which will open in September in Balham. And for now I am every Saturday setting up a pop-up stall in Balham Market and selling books. And from September I will be a fully-fledged bookseller, blogging not only books but also booze to Balhamites. 2 summer recommendations for you. The first one is Free, Coming of Age at the End of History by Leah Uppy. She is a professor of political theory at the London School of Economics. She grew up in Albania just as the communist regime was coming to an end. And what I love about this book is how vividly she conjures up that world of the 1980s in Albania. I was finishing reading it on the tube on the way here, and there was a brilliant section about her dad fiddling around with the aerial on the roof to try and get the TV signal coming across the Adriatic from Italy, and how she was basically saying the whole family depended on her dad's mood on a particular day, whether he would be able to have the patience to persevere with the aerial long enough to get the non-communist TV signal coming over. And she paints this extraordinarily vivid picture of the communist regime, but also muses on the idea of freedom. And I guess the idea that a lot of us in the West had, that the fall of the Berlin Wall was this great moment where people were suddenly free and free to embrace the world. And yet actually she explores the idea that perhaps in some ways community spirit was much more resilient before that great moment. It's a really brilliant read. My other recommendation I have for you is a great book that I read recently called Serious Money, Walking Plutocratic London by Caroline Knowles. Interestingly, there's a bit of a theme here. This is another book by a female academic based in London. What she does, as the title suggests, is walk around some of the richest areas of London, from Shoreditch to Mayfair. And what I think is brilliant about the book is that it both helped me understand for the first time what hedge funds actually are. So it has some of the background about how people make these extreme piles of cash. But then it has a sort of wonderful insights of an academic sociologist on how they spend it. And it paints this actually rather sad picture of these very lonely plutocrats drifting around empty squares in quiet areas of the city, sort of contemplating how to spend their vast fortunes. It's just a wonderful field guide to this extraordinary world that you feel you hear a lot about but don't actually understand.
You know, when you walk around those areas of London that just seem like another planet because they ooze money. You know, like if we go to West London, like Holland Park or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And I always just think, like, this is just another world. We're just scratching
so
out
clean.
an existence in North London, exactly. You know? But yeah, I'm so curious to go behind the curtain of all of that a little bit. And I love the way he's talking about the lonely plutocrats, you know, the poor.
Oh, poor plutocrat.
Yeah, they're not happy. They've got money, but they're not happy. And of course, that's what we want to know, right? I was actually curious to know, while I had him, I was curious to know what book he was going to be taking on his own holiday.
I think I will be taking Nicholas Butler's latest paperback, which is called Godspeed, and is out in early July. I love all of his novels so far, and I think I'm going to really enjoy that. It's about a very rich American lady who wants to build an incredibly amazing house in the middle of America on a very tight timescale. And it's about the lengths that this construction crew will go to in order to get their bonus for building it in a month.
And while we're in Journalist's Corner, let's go to Phil Chafee, book clubber, friend, journalist, and podcast regular.
I'm always reading a million different books. Just for fun summer reading, I want to highlight two of the books I'm actually in the middle of. The first, I think Laura talked about on your podcast, or rather talked about the author, who is Dorothy Dunnett. She was this amazing Scottish author who wrote two really astonishing multi-volume historical fiction series. The first of those is called The Lyman Chronicles, and it follows this sort of caddish but brilliant nobleman named Francis Crawford of Lyman through the second half of the 16th century, bopping around all over Europe, always getting back to Scotland. High romance, amazing historical research, about as dense as you can imagine. So you can't read this and check every reference because then you're completely lost. But I just think Dunnett is the best. I reread both this series and the other one, which is called The House of Niccolo, fairly regularly. So I spent the past 2 years rereading The House of Niccolo, which is about a very similar guy, but a century earlier in the 15th century. That one starts in Bruges and follows the creation of this massive mercantile house, comparable to, I guess, the Medici or the Bardi, as they built up their trade connections across Europe, into Africa, into Russia, and all the way over to Iceland. That is an 8-volume series, the last of which I am in the middle of now, which is called Gemini. Generally, I think people don't like Niccolo quite as much as they like Lyman. I think most people start on Lyman, and that is certainly when I've given Dorothy Dunnett as a present, I always give them the first of the Lyman Chronicles. But I think I actually prefer Nicholas just for the breadth and scope of the adventure. And I am slightly sad to be finishing up Gemini this summer, but it does mean I can then roll back into my slow rereading of the Lyman Chronicles next year. The other book I'm reading right now is slightly more serious. It is Fintan O'Toole's memoir, which was released late last year, I think, called We Don't Know Ourselves. I don't know if everyone knows Fintan O'Toole, but he's a very good columnist, I think, for the Irish Times. He writes for The Guardian as well. And he also has what looks like dozens of books. His memoir tracks basically the history of modern Ireland from his birth in 1958 all the way through the present day, and sort of goes year by year, framing a bit around O'Toole's personal history and childhood and the general memoir stuff. But much more interesting, charting what is happening with Ireland, which changes over that period of time from a deeply rural, conservative, Catholic, almost theocratic country in 1958 to the Ireland of today, where class is a much bigger issue than religion, and where it's developed market economy with the European headquarters of some of the biggest tech firms in the world. So O'Toole takes that transformation, digs into these amazing details every year. He's like an astonishing writer, and I really, really highly recommend this book. It sounds slightly heavy for a summer read, but it really isn't. It reads like a page turner, and on literally every page, I'm just learning a ton.
I read The Lyman Chronicles by Dorothy Dunnett on a summer holiday, and so can endorse that recommendation too. But what about you? What have you been reading since I left?
Mainly women's prize novels, which we're going to be talking about next week. But for a bit of light relief from all that required reading, I did dive into this little gem of a book from V.E. Schwab called Gallant. Regular listeners will know V.E. Schwab has written some books that I've absolutely loved. And in my spare time, I'm enjoying trying out the other books of hers that I don't know. What I'm learning about her is that she just loves playing around with different genres. So no two books of hers so far that I've read have been alike. So Gallant has this gothic vibe. It's the name of this large crumbling house with this strange set of people who live there. And the story is narrated by a girl we meet at her horrible boarding school. She's mute and no one around her knows sign language, so she's very isolated, and the other girls are really mean to her. And she has this thing where she can see dead people. She calls them ghouls. But they're generally quite benign. They don't really bother her that much, apart from they're just there. And then her mother, we learn, died in quite mysterious circumstances when she was very young. And she has this journal that her mother left. She doesn't know anything about her father, and this is her one connection to her family. And she pages through this journal trying to piece together clues of what happened and who she is and where she came from. And then she's taken out of school to this crumbling mansion, which turns out to be hers. And she meets her cousin Matthew, who's a few years older than her and seems very troubled and seems quite angry that she's there and she can't understand why. And then there's this rambling garden, it's all quite wild, and then there's a wall, and everyone seems very anxious about this wall and trying to shore up this wall and make sure that there are never any cracks in it. They're all quite preoccupied with it. And it turns out that on the other side of the wall, there's another mansion that's like a dark mirror to the real world one. And the lord of this other mansion is Death. And the story unfolds from there. If, like me, you love the Shades of Magic books, there are a few things in here that are like just faint echoes of those books that I absolutely love. But what I really loved was that this is completely different. And it's very self-contained, and she conjures up this world and these people really well. You always have this nice sense of the arc of the story. Sometimes if you read standalone things, you can feel a little bit like you're just left wanting more, or that they don't quite go deep enough. And this was just perfect. It was perfectly calibrated. Yeah, it felt like exactly enough. And I think she's so good at endings, V.E. Schwab. She does that really well, which is not always an easy thing to pull off. I love this. I think if you're after a really great atmospheric read that isn't going to demand too much of you, is just going to really take you somewhere dark and strange and beautiful, because it's just really beautifully done, then I recommend Gallant by V.E. Schwab.
Every now and then I think I should give V.E. Schwab more of a chance. And I was just thinking that. But then I was thinking about how you have tried Robin Hobb and are just pretty sure Robin Hobb is not for you.
Yeah, that's why
and
I
I am
keeping
pretty
quiet
sure
during the
that
Robin
V.E.
Hobb
Schwab is not
section.
for me. So, to each their own.
Well, I just think the only thing I think about that is that I just think there is this real sense that each of her books is really quite different. And if you didn't like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't like one of her other ones. That's what I found, which I think is just really impressive. That's testament to her talent as a writer, that she can just pull off these very different genres really convincingly. I love that about her. So I think you maybe would like this one. I really do, actually. I think you would maybe like Gallant. I've got one more recommendation.
You've been waiting for this one.
Yeah. So here is one of my very favourite authors, Ed Caesar, whose book The Moth and the Mountain regular listeners will well know, I adore. And he gave us his summer reading picks.
I remember reading Richard Price's Clockers, big crime novel, maybe 15 summers ago. I don't know when I read it. I'm not a big crime fiction person, but I read Clockers, which is a story about a New Jersey drug dealer called Strike and the murder cop, Rocco, who tracks him. And it's long, it's like 600 pages long. And I remember flying through it one summer and just being desperate to get back to it and being really struck by the structure of it, which is kind of pulmonary. It breathes in and out. You have a chapter with one character, then you have a chapter with another, and all of the people in it seem so complicated and three-dimensional. It was just a huge pleasure from start to finish. Rarely have I enjoyed a book as much as I enjoyed Clockers. I read a book last summer. It's a great summer book because it's kind of also set in the summer, which was called Virtue by Hermione Hobie, who is a British writer who lives in America. And her first book was also actually kind of a summer book called Neon in Daylight, which I loved, which is about a spring-summer relationship in New York City. But Virtue is thrilling and very funny about virtue signaling and all the cant of the Trump era. It's about a young guy who works at a literary magazine who finds himself entangled in a kind of older couple's relationship, and about his friend who decides to resist the creeping fascism that she sees around her. It's a very funny, withering, warm, clever book that, again, I'd absolutely loved. And I read it on holiday last year and adored it. And then, shall I maybe recommend just one more, which is, I don't think it's coming out until maybe August or September. But it's historical fiction, which is, again, not a genre that I read a lot of, by a historian that I know pretty well, Dan Jones. And he's written a book called Essex Dogs, which is a kind of 14th century Saving Private Ryan / Band of Brothers. I mean, some of the parallels with Saving Private Ryan are quite full on. It starts with a landing in Normandy, but it's a landing by a group of professional soldiers who are at the apex of King Edward's army as he goes to try and retake France in 1339 or whatever it is. And what you get after that is this rollicking war story about this group of guns for hire that all look out for each other from Essex and what becomes of them. It's been giving me enormous satisfaction to read that. I'm 100 pages from the end of a 500-page book, reading it in galley. And it's just huge fun. And I think even if you're not hugely into historical fiction, Essex Dogs might be a pretty fun place to start. So anyway, that's 3 recommendations. Clockers, definitely read it. Virtue, definitely read it. Essex Dogs, definitely read it.
I'm going to have to make a note to tell Phil about Essex Dogs, as he won't hear this show because of his blanket policy never to listen to any episode that he's actually in. But I think that one would be quite a good follow-on from all those Dorothy Dunnett books. And listeners, should you want to read the most engrossing, moving, page-turning, true-life story of a World War I veteran who decided to try to become the first man to reach the summit of Everest by flying there in his Tiger Moth plane, Ed's book, The Moth and the Mountain, is there waiting for you.
Well, I've made a long list of books from this episode, so I imagine that listeners have done the same. Which one are you going to read first, Kate?
Oh gosh, I was very sold on Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which I think absolutely sounds up my street. I'm quite keen to read Lessons in Chemistry because that sounds really fun. You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty sounded really intriguing. I quite want to read the one about the lonely plutocrats. Virtue sounded pretty interesting. Oh, too many good ones to choose. How about you?
Ooh, I'm definitely going to finish The Whalebone Theatre. I'm really excited to see where that goes.
Well, listeners, wherever you're spending your summer or winter, we hope it's enjoyable and we hope that you manage to find the time to read some great books.
That's nearly it for this episode.
Those book recommendations were Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, The Field by Robert Zeytala, Sea of Tranquility and The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, Hot Milk by Deborah Levy, Early Morning Riser by Catherine Heine, Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwa Kayamezi, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Torpedo, The Whalebone Theatre by Joanna Quinn, News of the Dead by James Robertson, Free by Leah Upi, Serious Money by Caroline Knowles, The Lyman Chronicles and the House of Niccolo sequence by Dorothy Dunnett, Gallant by V.E. Schwab, Clockers by Richard Price, Virtue by Hermione Hobie and Neon in Daylight by the same author, and Essex Dogs by Dan Jones.
No matter where or when you listen to this episode, you can always let us know your thoughts via our website, thebookclubreview.co.uk. There you'll find a page dedicated to this episode with full show notes on all the books we mentioned, a transcript, and a comments forum. Comments there go straight to our inboxes, so do get in touch and let us know your favourite summer reads. You can also find us on Instagram at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at bookclubrvwpod, or you can email us at thebookclubreview@gmail.com.
Next up is our Women's Prize podcast, in which we'll be focusing on the winner, just announced, The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. But we'll also have a look at the also-rans.
But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.